it told me my microphone was muted, and then I unmuted it, and it muted itself. So I apologize, but welcome everyone to another very exciting episode of the Magic Sandwich Show, which has been entitled the Reunion Show. And to a degree it is. We've got some of the original members of the show back again, and I'm hopeful that you'll be delighted to see them back. We've got HogtieChamp, we've got Concordance, and we've also got oh my god, I've forgotten. I'm so sorry. Oh yes. Ozzy, I'm so sorry. I forgot about you. But we've got them all back, and we have lots to discuss. But it's been a long time since most of us have been here on YouTube or on the internet or whatever. So what I would like to start with is inviting people, the hosts, to tell us what they've been up to, and where they've been and what have they been doing. And given the fact that I see it in a particular order, I'm going to start with Ozzy. Ozzy, what have you been up to?
Hello, DPR, and thank you for that wonderful introduction where you forgot my name. What have I been up to?
I'm so sorry, Ozzy. I'm so
That's quite all right. We spoke like 5 minutes ago, only 5 minutes ago, and you forgot my name already. Well, all that means is it's been too long since we've spoken. What have I been up to? Well, not a whole lot online, actually. My Ozymandias Ramses II channel has been largely dormant. I've made very, very few scripted videos, only a couple in the last couple of years, perhaps. I've appeared in a number of hangouts, and I've been doing podcasts and interviews and things like that. I've been devoting a lot of my time to other interests that I have that have to do with my passion for the outdoors and camping, canoeing, that sort of stuff. Those are my other hobbies. So I've been devoting my energies a lot more to that. So just a lot less time spent online, especially during this past summer. It's been sort of a boom year for those of us that love the outdoors here in part of Ontario that I live in. Just fantastic weather. So I have been, if you could see my face in natural color, you'd see I'm actually quite well tanned. But spending a lot of time outdoors. But I have not died. And I have not stopped producing any content. I just produce it a lot less frequently. Not that I was ever a high output producer of YouTube content, but it's wonderful to be back on the Magic Sandwich Show. Thank you for including me in this.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Hogtie. Where have you been hiding away? Or have you been hiding away?
No, the time just slips away, doesn't it? I know I've sort of had two different sort of an up and a down, right? Like I do find I spend a lot less time, producing content and certainly even consuming content. I still like to watch once in a while, but I've hosted maybe 2 hangouts. It seems to me like as the more funny of the nutter crowd has kind of dissipated, there's sort of fewer arguments to be had. I guess there are a few more flat earthers, but they're just intolerable to talk with. At the same time, I've been focusing more on the business we started a few years ago, and I've been coping a bit more with the weirdness of private sector work where, you make money and then you don't make money, and you make money, you don't make money. It's a little different from public sector where you kind of don't think about that and stress about it. And my kids are older now, 10 and 8. So where they used to be the adorable little munchkins that would run around in the background, they now do really. Okay, I'll see you guys in, I don't know when I'll be back, sorry.
I don't know quite what happened there, but let's move on to Concordance. A similar question, in fact, it's a point that Hogtie raised, Why are we not making YouTube videos anymore?
Yeah, YouTube sucks. Even though I haven't made videos in a while, I keep taking them down. I've had more DMCA claims, and it just sort of any video creator who doesn't want to commercialize is helpless against this sort of down flagging campaigns for no particular reason. Beyond that, it's just not the community it used to be. So I keep having intentions to come back, but I've shifted over to Twitter, and it allows me to engage with people, which was the whole reason I wanted to make videos in the first place, was to share ideas and talk nerd stuff to people. And the feedback is a lot more direct. There's a lot faster response time. There were some other things at work. So my daughter is 18 now. She's a freshman in college, and my son is 15. So, parenting, it does just continually add more time to what I have to do. And I got some promotions at work that increased my level of responsibility. And I had some heart-to-hearts with my own HR department on the exposure of being I don't know, really won't want to over dramatize it, but being a public person with personal opinions that I put out into the world, and also someone who was responsible for hiring and firing and promoting and so on. You expose yourself to a certain amount of liability when you put your personal views out on the internet. And so there's some of that. I didn't want that to come back on my family. So kind of a mixture of things, from YouTube sucks to career change, to the fact that my kids are now like real people, real adults. It just keeps getting crazier and harder to find the time.
I met you a few years ago, probably more than a few, but I remember being desperately disappointed that I didn't actually ask you a question that I had messaged you about. You had made a video, why do whales not get more cancer, part 1, and you didn't, although you had in the first video, you had not said, you said there was going to be a part 2. And when I messaged you saying, where is part 2? You said you couldn't do it. and then I met you in Texas. And I just forgot to ask you what would be in the second part if you could make it. Can you?
Yeah. So at the time, I couldn't talk about it. So a lot of what I do at work is intellectual property, tech transfer, and I sign a lot of non-disclosure agreements with these big companies that do biotech. And one of the companies I had worked with that sort of sparked the reason why I did the video was looking at human longevity. And I was, again, reminded that I had an NDA with this company, and this work was under embargo. So at this point, I can talk about it. And I wasn't going to talk about anything proprietary. I was just going to talk about the general subject of what we know about longevity in mammals. And so, yeah, I couldn't talk about it at the time. I do still. That's the one that is stuck in my head that I really want to finish. I've written most of the script. It's just one of those things where I want to sit down and push it out.
Can you tell us about it now, or are you
Sure.
not allowed? Oh,
okay. Before you do that, I got to point something out. Either literally just yesterday, one of my neighbors was asking me about evolution and about different selective pressures, and I used the example of how mouse cells are about the same size as elephant cells, and therefore elephants must have more cell division. So why don't elephants get cancer more? And it kind of blew her mind. She was just like, wow, that's really amazing. Why is that? I said, I don't know. The guy didn't make part 2 of the video.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of mechanisms. So the thing is, it's so interesting to dive into the full complexity of it and all of the unknowns, and it's blowing the minds of people who work on related fields too, because there's not just one answer. One of the ways that you can make a whale and a mouse is actually with roughly the same number of stem cells, and you just have more cells that are capable of making lots of cells, and each of them replicates a little bit more, but ultimately the number of high risk cells that you create is about the same. So that's the one that I really wanted us to kind of get into, because it's so counterintuitive. But once you sort of see the physics of it, the math of it, it actually comes together, so that the difference between the number of cell divisions between a whale and a mouse is actually not that much. The other things, of course, are metabolic differences, right? Mice metabolize things much faster, and in doing so, they create a lot of energy, right? They can access that energy a lot faster. Whereas a whale, if you panic a whale, the kind of responses you're going to see are a good deal slower. So metabolism makes a factor, but then it's also like built into their genetics, and there must be some, stabilizing evolutionary force that's driving the emergence of even more intricate mechanisms to prevent cancer. And everybody always wants to say that naked mole rats never get cancer. They do. They get less cancer. But the way that they control cancer, and the way that a mouse might control cancer, and the way that a whale controls cancer have different levels of complexity to them and rely on different kinds of mechanisms. And that's one of the most fascinating topics in the evolution of cancer, which is an area that I've spent a lot of time in recently. Why do we have cancer? Cancer's programmed into us. And really, there's no sharp defining line between a cell that we would call precancerous and the cell that is cancerous. The mutations are present even before the tumor arises, and it's just a series of events that occur. And to the tumor, that's a desirable outcome. Those cells suddenly are on this entirely new growth trajectory. For the patient as a whole, it's a terrible tragedy. So it's kind of interesting. I don't want to go into too much depth, because we would just, I think, spend all day on this.
I appreciate that we could take up the entire show talking about this topic, but I'm just curious. In my family, for example, there is a very low rate of cancer. Most of my family have had long lives, and they have not died of cancer. I'm just curious as to whether there is a propensity within humans for cancer to form. Does that question make sense? And if so, can you answer it?
Cancer is built into every multicellular organism. There are no organisms that don't get cancer. And the reason we don't think of cancer as a major killer of most animals is because they don't live long enough to develop cancer. So it's the animals that we are most familiar with. We see it. And obviously with humans, we've extended our longevity well beyond what I think evolution is comfortable with. There's certainly no reason why we should live to be 100. If we've had children at 20, evolution is pretty much done with us. So there's nothing to constrain the progression of cancer that strikes later in life. The only evolutionary pressure would be against cancer in children, who then don't progress to being able to have children of their own. So no, I mean, there's no reason why we wouldn't have these things. And obviously there's always a balance between your cells being able to grow and heal and reproduce, and the sort of checkpoints that we put in place to prevent them from growing and developing and so on. So yeah, it's a delicate. I always like to say it's like walking on a tightrope, right? Where you fall either side, you've got an organism that either has cancer or metabolically is not viable. It's an infinitely long tightrope, so everybody will fall off eventually. Everyone will get cancer eventually, or end up in organ failure. So you can't extend human life indefinitely. At one point, you're going to fall off the tightrope. And that's just built into how it works.
Well, that's a sort of sad and pessimistic view of things, but I'm absolutely sure you're right. Now, when I was asked to come onto this show, I was under the impression that I would be a guest as opposed to a host. And it was only about 6 hours ago that I was told, oh no, you're going to be a host. And prior to that, I had identified 3 subjects which I wanted to talk about. And the first is one which I hope behind the scenes Squognaut is going to be able to play, which relates to climate change, because the 3 issues that I had in mind were climate change, the effect of plastic on the environment, and Donald Trump. That's 3. I actually had 4, and the 4th was also Donald Trump. Squognaut, could you play the video that I sent to you? Would that be okay?
Is that we'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us. we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was a very powerful speech that was given by Greta. And what I found absolutely extraordinary was the response. If you, and I'm sure Squad Nut will post the link to that video. If you look at it, the responses to it are absolutely extraordinary. They basically say, okay, she's only 16 years old, she doesn't know what she's talking about, she doesn't have all the facts, she is accused of being effectively being a victim of child abuse, and what she says is untrue, and she's also criticized for her reasoning by virtue of the fact that she has Asperger's. Ozzy, you haven't spoken too much. What do you make of that? And you know, as I said at the get-go, one of the topics I wanted to talk about was Trump. Is there anything that you identify in what she said that is untrue, or equivalent to, or by reason of her Asperger's?
I'm not aware of anything that she said that was false in that talk, but I mean, I did make it my mission to fact check her. I was more interested in sort of the larger issue of people's reaction to it and how ought we to feel about this. Now, I mean, a lot of the animosity and vitriol directed at her stems from the fact that this was a bad piece of overacting. There's just some pretty ham acting going on here. This was a rehearsed speech, and I'm sure I mean, this is not her first time speaking in a large venue in front of officials or anything like that. But nevertheless, I can see how being in that kind of intense spotlight and glare of media could leave her somewhat overwhelmed with emotion and tearing up. But I did think it was overacted, and I think that is one of the things that people landed upon as a reason to criticize what she had to say. I think we are right to be suspicious of people who are not out of high school yet, who would speak in such castigating tones to people. This really struck me as a piece of bad theater, but that doesn't mean that the message was incorrect, and it doesn't mean that lots of young people don't feel exactly that way, right? But this is what was hard for people to disentangle. There was this performance by this young lady who was in many respects very unappealing. No one likes to be talked down to and scolded by a child, and that's what it has the feel of that, right? And so that was part of it. And then, and you're quite right though. I mean, the attacks on her were just vicious. They were vitriolic. And then there was an equal number of people defending her and championing her and attacking everyone who was critical for whatever reason, even on matters of substance, and dismissing them. So, this is sort of the kind of thing that you would expect, that these extreme reactions on both sides. But I'm kind of interested in how we ought to feel about this. I mean, is the fact that young people are disproportionately going to be affected by the mistakes that we're making now, by ignoring climate change and not acting as we should, does that entitle them to take the microphone, to take the stage? And are we supposed to heed them with any special consideration over and above that of, say, experts? The pragmatist in me wants to say, well, listen, if it just gets people listening and gets people taking it seriously, then yes. But my suspicion is that the people that need to listen and need to take it seriously are not going to listen and take it seriously when the message comes packaged in this way. So I don't think even from a pragmatic perspective, it is going to be efficacious, even though I would like it to be. And
could we take Hogtie's opinion on this? I appreciate your contribution, Ozzy. Let's hear from Hogtie.
Well, I'll touch on the points where Ozzy and I align, and then I'll sort of probably be a little more expressive in my sort of frustration with the whole situation. I mean, it certainly does come across as odd that, a high schooler is here and being so castigating to the leaders of the world, or, people who consult with the leaders of the world. And generally, I don't think good public policy arises from having impassioned speech from high schoolers. But what are we to do at this point? What do we compare this with? We've been listening to the experts for years, or the experts have been talking for years, and some people listen to them and believe them, and then other people argue. And I got to say, I sort of share her emotionality with it, the frustration. Getting older each year. This is a problem that we knew about when we were children, and we'd always kind of expected, like all these other problems with the human enterprise, that we'd get to it. We'd figure this out. We'd use science to understand the problem. We'd use our social structures, our political structures to actually, come up with solutions and implement those solutions. And none of that has happened. Like it's genuinely upsetting. I'm going to start sounding like her in a second, but it is genuinely upsetting to me to be, approaching the latter part of my life and just watch, like, what have we done? Why could we have not figured this out? We've known this problem. It was speculated about in the 1950s, and a lot of the science was refined in the 70s. And through the 80s, we knew that we were at a tipping point. And now we're past it. We've committed our planet to, periods of there being no polar ice caps. And it drives me crazy that the actual the way that as the human enterprise has approached dealing with the problem of our effect on our impact on the climate is sort of the post-truth thinking of, like, well, people have a right to their opinion. Well, people have a right to their opinion that when you change the CO2 concentration by only 200 parts per million, that's a trivial amount. I still have people, just had a family member just a couple of days ago had said to me the thing about how, well, CO2 is plant food. So I don't know why people's upset about it. Like, why does that message get around? Why is there uptake on that? It's because we're not listening to the experts. And we live in a post-truth world where we can have sides to a discussion. What does it even mean to say that there are sides to this discussion? There's the truth. And there's people who are developing an understanding that's closer and closer to truth. And then there's people who are just more wrong. That's all there is. People who are, slightly wrong as they're learning the truth, and other people just don't even give a shit about being right. And this whole idea that we've approached this political problem with, this environmental problem, this physical problem, with the same sense of political equity that we approach things like healthcare funding, or funding the military, or whether or not we should teach sex ed in classrooms. And the spirit of compromise in a situation like this spells doom. Like it just makes life miserable for the next generations. And I'll wrap up on this point, but it's basically, the right-minded people, the scientists, the ones who study this and say, like, they don't want this to be the case. The scientists aren't saying, well, oh, it's my preference that the world's, falling apart because of what we're doing to it. They're studying and saying, well, geez, it turns out we've got some bad news here. And part of the bad news is the minimum, the absolute limit to what we can do here, like cutting the razor's edge, this is the solution we have to do. We have to have carbon budgets. We have to look for alternate fuel sources. And we have to have this done by this date on the calendar, because that's the razor's edge. If we're past that, we're not going to make it. And then you got the other group of people who say, well, we shouldn't do anything about it at all. And the spirit of compromise says, okay, well, we'll do halfway to minimum because that's the fair and just thing to do. It just makes me sad.
Can I take your views, Concordance?
Sure. So, I mean, an activist should sound the way she sounds. It shouldn't be a neutral tone if you're truly passionate about something. The question is that who is she targeting with her message? And I think the answer to that is that she was certainly not trying to persuade people who are already on the, if you will, the other side of the equation. She's trying to energize a base, and I think it was an effective. I mean, I felt stirred. Clearly, Hogtie, resonated with that kind of anger, which I don't think it did make me a little bit uncomfortable. Being, as you say, sort of criticized by a child for inaction, it hurt a little. It made me feel even a little bit uncomfortable, which I think was the point. But it's also highly predictable what the response would be. So there's actually a fairly extensive body of literature on how people react to undesirable facts around scientific truth. The things she was saying were all true.
May I just interrupt you briefly, just to address this point? Do you think that the criticism of her statements was justified? That is to say, is there anything factually wrong with what she said?
I haven't fact checked it. Are you asking specifically the figures used?
Yes.
I don't know.
Okay.
They all sounded correct to me. I would assume that would have been the headline if she was off by an order of magnitude or 3 orders of magnitude or something ridiculous like that. I think the popular media would have picked up on that pretty quickly. So I'm just going to have to assume that her figures really weren't the focus, though. It wasn't a scientific argument. It was an emotional argument, and I think it was delivered with the right kind of context to, again, energize a base. I don't think there was anyone on the other side that was persuaded, but statistically, there's no chance that they would have been, right? That's just not how people's brains work. They create these cultural identities for themselves, and they reject any facts that they find incompatible with that identity. And I pulled up some stats on how different political views. 73% of Democrats or people who lean Democrat think scientists should be involved in an active role in policy debates. Meanwhile, Republican or Republican leaning, 56% of them say scientists should stay out of policy debates and just focus on their facts, right? So clearly there's a difference on politically on how we feel policies should be set. Are they set by these, eggheads up in their ivory towers, or is this something for we the people to decide on what the facts really are?
What's your conclusion on that?
I mean, scientists clearly need to be involved in matters of policy on which their expertise are directly relevant. And there's a level of understanding where they need to have a voice. Would you challenge that? I honestly, would anyone challenge?
I certainly would not. One of the people we could have had here, Aaron Ra, frequently says that faith is the most dishonest position to take. And the scientific evidence is something that I think that we should accept. Faith has absolutely no basis on this at all. And I want to go back to Ozzy because he's been quiet for a short time. Do you think I'm right, Ozzy? When you're comparing evidence, should you accept faith or should you accept scientific evidence?
Well, obviously, I think faith is just irrelevant in these kinds of discussions. And with respect to Hogtie's point earlier about the passion, what I thought precisely was missing there was any appearance of sincere passion. It looked fake, and that just sets everybody's bullshit detectors off, right? So that people that might have been much more impressed if a scientist had spoken with a sincere passion, it would have made a huge difference, right? But this sort of condescending tone from a 16-year-old, a kind of forced, transparently bad acting display, I think has the opposite effect of what you want. You get people talking, but you get people talking in the wrong ways, right? So everyone's been talking about this, right? But it just seems to me that both sides are driven to extremes. So you get one group of people who are saying, we don't have to listen to this, that, you know, she's autistic, she's ignorant, she's brainwashed, she's a puppet, you know, there's all this kind of stuff, all this crude dismissal, and she's easy to dismiss precisely because of the fact that she lacks any qualifications. She is a school child. Because let me finish the point. And because the performance seemed so forced. Now, if Concordance had given a comparable talk and was just as impassioned, then it was a sincere one, right? It wasn't just sort of a bad acting job, as I think he could be capable of delivering a better performance, a more heartfelt one. I think it would go much longer. Someone like Concordance or any scientist on the subject, any climate scientist, could not be so easily dismissed. And that's the problem, is we don't want to supply our opponents in a subject that is so important with all the ammunition they need to dismiss what is being said. And so she has been written off as a liar, a pawn, a fake, completely ignorant, which she might be. I don't know. I mean, she might be just repeating facts that she hasn't looked into, right? Which may or may not be correct. And she's being written off as hysterical. That this is a hysterical thing. This is nothing but fear mongering, right? This is precisely not the way the message should be delivered. It galvanizes the other side against a more sober voice, right? What we need are the most sober voices that we can deploy here.
Can you name 3 climate scientists?
No, and that's a disgrace that these people are not out there, right? I mean,
but they're giving talks all the time.
Right. I mean, yeah, but they're not getting invited to the UN, and the media are not showing up, right? This is a problem.
So I think that the whole point of activism is not to present a passionless analysis of the issues.
I didn't say it should be. Wait a minute, hang on. Let me stop you there.
Sure.
I didn't say it should be passionless. I specifically said, for instance, if you were to give a talk on this, I think you could give a talk that was rightly impassioned and sincerely put forward, right? But and which is what we would need, right? If you're just cold and analytical, people that they'll just doze off. No one will listen. And certainly, the media wouldn't pay any attention to it.
There's a climate scientist I quite like. She's at Texas Tech. She is one of the many hosts of a show called Global Weirding, and she recently put out a video on what are actually effective engagement techniques to change people's minds, what actually works. And it's rooted in this understanding of good science communication. You're absolutely right that what Greta did was the least effective strategy, which is sort of shaming, and any kind of frivolous or emotional arguments tend not to land. And what does land is to identify shared values.
Right.
Example she gives is, if you were talking to an evangelical Republican, you can talk about your kids or your grandkids, and how you all want, the cleanest water, the best soil. You want the world that you leave for your kids to be the best it possibly can be. And we know that our emissions are going to have an impact. It's not the world that we grew up in. And, it's our job as good stewards under Jesus Christ or whatever, that you find the identifiable shared value sets, and people's guards go down. The moment you get shrill or accusatory, people retreat, and it doesn't matter what the message is at that point. So in that sense, I completely agree with you that if the intention here was to change minds, it was an abject failure. I think the intent here was to motivate a base that was already persuaded, and maybe it's just lost their passion or momentum, or forgotten that they're meant to be angry about it. I don't know what that is, but I wonder if it shakes loose funding, or it re-energizes some people that had stepped away from the fight because it just seems so hopeless.
That's a very good point, and I take that point, actually, that it's supposed to animate people, but it animates the other side too. That's the difficulty here.
They're already animated.
Before you go on, can I just say that there are questions from the audience that are being posted, and if you would like to address them, please do so. But there's another one just popped up. Does everyone see that? A question from Brian G. Yeah. I have no problem whatsoever with the conversation carrying on as it is, but if you want to,
sure, I can address the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question is directed to me. It says, at the Magic Sandwich Show, ask Ozzy what he would have expected to see that would have convinced him that Greta was not acting. How should she have acted to be more believable? Well, I don't think there's going to be criteria. I thought it was a transparently forced performance. This is sort of the quivering lip, and the moments of great passion, and she stops cold, just deadpan, looks down at her notes, and then recites another line. There's no sense of sort of mounting outrage that slowly dissipates. It just goes up and down. It just seemed fake and transparent. Now, you could chalk this up as, well, the people who are sympathetic to her are going to believe her and think she's sincere, and the people who are opposed to her position are going to dismiss her as some kind of fake and charlatan or something like that, or a pawn, right? Except that I'm fully in her camp. I'm fully on the side of people that are trying to do something about climate change. I see the effects of climate change right in my neighborhood. There are species of birds, for instance, cardinals, that exist in the part of Ontario that I live in that never existed here before. They're moving further and further north. Right, our winters are getting milder. Our summers are getting longer and hotter. The nature of the flora is changing. There's just all kinds of changes happening, and I find it very, very distressing. I'm literally thinking of moving north because I like my winters, and winters here are getting just a little too mild, a little too often. So it certainly isn't the case that the people.
We've got another question.
Okay, sorry.
And I don't know who this is necessarily directed to, but if anyone wants to pick up, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ozzy, but I did agree with Squagnod that we would take questions. So does anyone want to pick up on this one, which reads, well, that's after the topic about climate change, can you talk about the state of skeptic community?
Why don't we pass on that one for now, DPR? That's a whole new topic. I feel like there's still some meat on that.
Yeah, let's put a pin in it. I mean, that says after, after this one. I was actually kind of hoping for an opportunity to respond to what Ozzy had said several minutes ago, if I can strain to remember it. But it was a lot about the packaging and about the, just to try to recapture what Ozzy had said so people know what I'm answering here, about the packaging and the handing the other side, essentially a criticism of this speech because of some things that can be taken as sort of transparently inauthentic in the way she presented it. And my response to that observation would be that if you think there was a right way to package her message, then you're just not jaded enough, or there would have been a right person to package that message. I don't think you're jaded enough, because the who is going to be like, whatever the solution is, this isn't a solution we're going to figure out in 2020. It's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of commitment, a lot of deeply entrenched commitment of the people who are involved in governance for many, many, many years to come. And if you want to know who the solution to climate change is, do you think it's me? Do you think it's you? You know, for an old musical reference here, 17 plunger points for people who get this reference. But there's less days in front of this horse than riding in back of this cart, right? Like, our generation didn't fix this problem, and you may be well intentioned, but we're done. There's nothing we can do. Our generation is still having the discussion about whether or not that climate change is real, it's human caused. Why did they change the name from global warming and all that nonsense? We need to some extent, kind of indoctrinate. We need that next generation. That's totally the wrong word for it. We need that next generation to be wholly convinced of that which is true, right? And I agree with Concordance's point about that speech is basically to motivate a base. And if there's any shortcomings, pardon me, if there's any shortcomings in her speech, it should only focus on criticism of how it was ineffective in motivating that base. But any discussion about how it would be ineffective in convincing, quote unquote, the other side, which, as I said earlier, I think is a complete nonsense principle in this thing, the fact that there is an other side, those people will not change their minds. The same people who will say, as Ozzy points out quite rightly, that they will look and say, well, she's a kid, she's inauthentic, the emotionality went up and down, and I don't really believe her. Those are the same people who are not addressing what she's saying on the factual matter. These are the same people who say, oh, you don't have to believe the whistleblower because the whistleblower is probably a Democrat, right? No, let's address the actual facts that are being brought to our attention. And so, I mean, in terms of her messaging, I don't think we're actually collectively been motivated. The other side won't be motivated by scientists. Every time scientists say something, well, they're ivory tower egg-headed weenies. They're elitists, right? Right-minded people are motivated by getting the correct information from right-minded truth seekers like scientists. And the wrong-thinking people of the world who object to this whole enterprise of trying to not destroy our planet are not going to be swayed by, so a teenager does it. We could have got a big-breasted actress to go up there and look pretty and do it. We could have had, what's his name, Brad Pitt, right? We could have any of that stuff. It doesn't matter.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you want to address the question that has just been posted?
Can we stay on topic, DPR? I think again, there's still some more meat here. So one of the things we haven't touched on is the fact that she is affected by Asperger's. I've forgotten the other condition. So she's on the spectrum. Selective mutism, I think. Is that relevant, do you think, to sort of how she comes across?
I totally accept that what you say is true, but what I dislike is if you look at the video that she made, you will get on YouTube a whole host of criticisms of her opinion, and I just think it is totally unfair to say that because she has Asperger's, that the content of her message is inaccurate. Are you saying that I am wrong in that?
No, I think quite the opposite. I'm wondering if Ozzy is picking up on potentially the effects of her autism on how she presents herself. And I honestly, when that became a defining characteristic.
Let him address that. Ozzy.
Sure, I'd be happy to address that. Yeah, it's entirely conceivable, in fact, likely, that sort of the forced nature with which she was saying these things And what struck me and many others as a kind of feigned passion and feigned outrage in that moment. Not that she isn't genuinely outraged, not that she isn't genuinely fearful about prospects for the future. I think that's all sincere. But I think that the performance, which is what I've been talking about, was feigned. And I think that might be because, yeah, being on the spectrum, it might be that she's just not very good at
that. Are you saying that her performance was feigned, as in she was put up to it in some way?
No. She's been an activist for a long time.
As other people have said, that it was a form of child abuse.
No, that's all ridiculous. No, that's all ridiculous. That's all kind of that's the kind of dismissive ad hom that I think is completely that itself should be dismissed. I don't think that she's insincere. She's been an activist for many years, right? She's been a child activist on this particular subject for a number of years now. This is not her first rodeo, right? So there's no doubt in my mind that she is genuinely fearful about her future and the future of her generation. That she is angry and that she is outraged about it. I think that's all true. I don't think that she would sort of devote all her time and energy as much as she does and put herself on, before the media glare if she didn't sincerely believe what she's saying. So there's no charge of insincerity. My what I was talking about was that it was a performance failure here, right? That she's not the best spokesperson for this. She's getting a lot of attention because she's a young person, and she's getting a lot of attention precisely because people were just apoplectic about being scolded by a school child, right? That's what they don't like. And I want to address HogtieChamp's point here.
I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but is there anything that she said in that 4.5-minute speech that she gave that is not factually accurate?
Not that I'm aware of, and that's not what I've been talking about, though.
I just need to apologize. I do need to step out of the chat. It's been great talking with all of you and seeing you all again. Mexican food is calling. It's 6 p.m. in Texas. The family are very eager to get to Mexican food, so I'll let you guys resume your conversation. Good to see you all.
Cheers. Lovely to talk to you again, concordance. Take care and best wishes.
Well, let's be clear about this. I'm making grilled cheese sandwiches right now because that's the kind of commitment I have to this broadcast.
Well, I made a point of eating ahead of time. Early.
Oh, good point. But I do have to leave in a half hour.
Well, I have to leave in a half hour too. So
in that time, don't worry.
Yeah. So to address HogtieChamp's point earlier about, listen, you don't have to worry about trying to convince the other side, because clearly that's not what she's trying to do. She's trying to sort of, galvanize her base and move people to take it seriously. That's true. That's all to the good. The difficulty is that what we're up against here are people that they don't just not want to believe. They're not just suspicious of scientists. There are people here who have interests, right? Economic and political interests in just keeping the ball rolling the way it's rolling in the wrong direction and just wrecking the planet, They have a vested short-term interest in doing that. And so they don't want to be concerned about the future, and they don't care about the truth of what she's saying. But along comes this person who is just the perfect package for dismissal and to disregard. And so now the conversation is about, well, her Asperger's syndrome and whether she was put up to it. Look, it shouldn't be a question that she's put up to. She's been doing this for years, right? This is clearly one of her passions. I don't think her parents could talk her out of it even if they wanted to, right? Everyone's talking about the fact that, well, she's a professional actress and her parents are actors, or at least her father's an actor and stuff, right? That's all irrelevant. But the problem is the performance. The messenger here was the wrong messenger. And it's not irrelevant that people that I know who are not politicians and not scientists are going, she is just typical of all these crazy environmentalists. Right? Like environmentalism is getting written off by millions of people this way.
I have to ask you again. I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that she said in that 4.5-minute speech that is inaccurate?
I've answered that like 3 or 4 times, and I'm not aware of anything that's inaccurate.
So, what's the problem? Your problem is with the messenger, not the message.
The effect of having the wrong messenger, right? We have to be careful who we put up front in these kinds of things and who we decide to spotlight. Right? When we shine a spotlight on someone who is guaranteed to galvanize our opponents and discredit environmentalism, I think it's a bad idea.
Who would be a better messenger?
But, well, very nearly anybody, but preferably someone who is scientifically accredited, who has qualifications in the field of climate science, who is a good communicator. Now, the difficulty is that's not very sexy, and the media don't want to light upon this. And so we're talking about this precisely because it was a child scolding a bunch of politicians, right? That captured people's imagination. But it doesn't just capture the imaginations of those of us who are going, rah, 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 would that everyone would think this way, right? Why can't everyone think this way? No, it also captures the imagination of everyone who's not so inclined. And they're galvanized. And they look at those of us who try to defend what she's saying as completely crazy. They're saying, oh, look, I mean, this is just the kind of thing that a school child will trot out. She has no credentials. She could be a brainwashed. That's not impossible, right? People are not wrong to be suspicious when the messenger is not qualified. That's not a mistake that people are making. It's a mistake that we make when we put this person up as a champion for a cause.
I take your point, but there are occasions in history where we can look at people who may not be totally savvy of the topic they're relating to, but they can cause a what's the best expression for it? An emancipation, I suppose, of what they're talking about. Now, even if she is 16 years old, even if she is subject to abuse by critics, as subject to child abuse or whatever, if her message is correct, and recent polls suggest that she may well get the Nobel Prize for Peace, which I don't quite understand how that would be, but it's potential. Even though she's 16 and suffers from Asperger's, if her message is correct, what's the problem? Just because she's not old enough?
Well, sorry, if I can step in a little bit, because I sort of feel like I think we've kind of got our positions out, and to whatever extent, Ozzy is right or wrong, the audience can decide. I mean, I'm sort of feeling like on this topic, I'm ready for kind of a last word. I mean, what I'm hearing from Ozzy is that he agrees with the message. He didn't precisely fact check everything that's in there, but it certainly seems consistent with the facts she had presented, or consistent with things that we're hearing from the multitude of experts that have spoken in a plethora of different venues. My only concern, I sort of want this to be my last word on it. My only sort of concern, I kind of take Ozzy's point that, like, there are a lot of people who aren't going to be swayed by this kid, and there's even justifications for not taking her word for it. She's not an expert. It's a different way of packaging the message. I think that if it were a choice, like if we're up to Ozzy and we said, look, we can have only one person go to that podium, and that person's going to deliver the message. She's not the best messenger for it. That's fine. But there have been a multitude of experts in a plethora of different venues, all giving the same message, the same information, speaking with passion, and also at that assembly, right? This is not the first time that that assembly has heard that information. They've heard it from the experts, and I'm just at the point now. We just need more people first, step one, learn the truth. This isn't a political message. This is a factual message. This is a commentary on reality, not ideology. We need more people knowing the truth and more people conveying the message, right? Let's get every scientist up to go out there and give the speech. Let's get a child to give the speech. Let's get Brad Pitt to give a speech, right? Let's get, I don't care, a big animated dinosaur giving that same information out to the public. This is something that we have been discussing for years, are going to continue discussing, and it just, the more people who are talking about it, the better. The one thing I think where she was a good choice, I agree with Ozzy's concerns, but I'm saying the message is out there from a lot of different people. This is one person who's able to energize a bunch of teenagers and even kids that are like 10 years old who are going to look at that and just go, yeah, she's got a point. The grown-ups screwed this up. It's going to be up to us. And I think ultimately that's going to be helpful. That is to say, that's a benefit from her speech that is in addition to hearing from the experts, not instead of hearing from the experts.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where I think that the messenger is really important. Someone in the live chat, Elos back, brought up an interesting analogy. She said, look, G-Man is not a good spokesman for Christianity. He's a terrible spokesperson for Christianity, right? But the worst person you could want. If you're a Christian, this is not someone you want leading the charge. And you do not want this person representing you. And I think that she's just too young and without qualifications for us to seriously take her seriously. It isn't that she's mistaken. I don't have to prove that she's mistaken. I don't think she is mistaken. I haven't heard any experts coming out and denouncing her and contradicting the facts that she brought forward. That's not the issue. The issue for me is one of strategy, where if your spokespeople and if the media are making this person the spokesperson, and this spokesperson is one who is so easily dismissed. I have a friend just messaged me who sort of thanked me for making this point. This friend of mine thinks that global warming is a conspiracy. He's not a stupid person. He's an intelligent person. He's an educated person. He's thoughtful. He's interested in politics. And he takes an active interest in American politics, for instance, right? He dismisses all of this out of hand, right? And this is the kind of thing that he will point to. He'll say, well, look, you've got 16-year-olds doing this, and the media is just going gaga over this 16-year-old who's simply not in a position to know that she's right, right? And this person is scolding the leaders of the world. People are right to think something's wrong with this country.
I invited you, and I invited the other people who are on the show. And also, if you want to post a question, please do so. Post it at the Magic Sandwich Show, and we will address it if we can. But my point is, and I know I'm repeating myself, but what did she get wrong?
That's not at all at issue. She could have uttered something for 4 minutes.
Sorry,
that was without any error. It strikes me as irrelevant.
What matters to you then is the fact that she's 16 and she's got Asperger's.
No, certainly not her Asperger's, and not even her age, but her lack of qualifications. I don't know how many times I need to make this distinction.
If she is telling the truth about the situation,
she's not a reliable purveyor of information by virtue of the fact that she is just a school child, right? If she was 16 years old but had a PhD in the relevant field, all right, that would change my mind completely. I'd say, wow, we've got a brilliant young person here who should be leading the charge, and the media should be focusing on this person.
I disagree with you here, Ozzy. And you know that that's a very difficult position for me to take, but I have to disagree with you because I don't accept that having a PhD is necessary.
I didn't say it was necessary. I was saying you asked me earlier, who would be a better, right? that person would have been better. Right?
Well, who would do better? I'm asking you,
Almost any climate scientist.
Is there anything that she said that was not true?
Look,
She had a PhD.
look, I'm not arguing that anything that she said was fallacious. I'm saying that this is just bad PR, right? It doesn't just animate people her age. It animates all the young conservatives out there. It's not like there aren't young conservative minds out there. It's not like there aren't people like my friend who are intelligent and politically engaged, who are not just repulsed by what they're seeing here, and not just repulsed by what they see as a scolding finger wagging child. It's not just that. It's that they see the media fawning over her. This sets alarm bells on, and I think that we are imprudent in elevating this person to such a place of high status on such a consequential matter.
Yeah, I take your point, and I'd love to talk about it more, but we seem to have a new person in the conversation. So, Squog, do you want to bring him in?
Hey, DPR, how you doing? Ozzy.
Cheers.
Howdy.
There's one other thing aspect of the climate change discussion that I think needs to be addressed, and I think that there's a real lack of the communication, like the scientific communication that goes into it. It is we can bring up a lot of the examples. We know that we have the research, we have the papers. There's tons of stuff out there that you can find. But one of the things that gets dismissed a lot is like, okay, yeah, well, no one's denying that the carbon dioxide levels are going up, or that the average temperature has gone up by 0.5 or 1 degrees, or whatever the research is saying there. But where a lot of it gets dismissed is what the implications are. People try to extrapolate off this. It's like, well, this means like at this current rate, we have X amount of years before this happens, or X amount of years before this happens, and that type of stuff I think is what isn't getting communicated effectively enough. It gets almost like brought up and dismissed as, well, it's just fear mongering. There's no indication of this. People don't know what the repercussions of this are, and I think it's that lack of communication on it, which is where a lot of the pushback comes from, and in that sense is that I feel like the science communicators have failed in that aspect, and to really kind of articulate this. And I know that climate change is a huge topic that not every single person can just pick up and grasp what it is. And so the putting out of the 16-year-old like Greta there to talk about to make the same points, I still don't think is communicating the message clearly enough to what people need to hear. And that's where I would agree with Ozzy that, yeah, the actual scientific communicators, people that are doing this, have to get this message out clear, have to be able to articulate it in a way that is just almost undeniable. And, this dismissal of this as speculation, that gets thrown around by the conservatives or by people that deny what the impacts are. Those are the kind of challenges that need to be addressed more.
I think that's kind of for you, Ozzy.
I don't disagree with that. But in fact, I'm not sure I detected a criticism in there if there was intended to be one. So.
I'm not sure either, but
it wasn't a criticism. It was just that where we are losing the battle in spreading information about climate change, it isn't being addressed. And when you have someone like Greta that you're bringing out, and they're repeating the same points, and they might be reaching more people, but they're reaching more people with the same points, and it doesn't address any of the the criticisms that are out there. A lot of the criticisms that are out there, I feel, could be handled, but it has to be handled with better science communication, and better science communication isn't going to be coming from a high school student, and it's going to be coming from the actual people that study this. It's on them. to make sure that this information gets out there clearly and undeniably to people. And that's where my criticism is.
Could I address that for a moment? I don't think that what she did wrong was not communicate science effectively, because I don't think she was there to do that. She's not a scientist. She has no business going in there and trying to communicate the science to people, right? That's not what she's trying to do. She's trying to impress upon these world leaders and these highly influential people that something is terribly important is at stake, and it's at stake for her generation more than theirs, and they need to start thinking about not just their own immediate priorities, but taking a longer view, right? There's nothing wrong with that message. The problem is, think how much better it would have been if it had been someone who was in university, obtaining a degree in the relevant field, who spoke in a way that was completely respectful. It could be every bit as pointed, right, but not castigated, and not a kind of a bad overacting display, right? That would have gone a lot further. I think part of the difficulty here is that people say, well, look, she's garnered all of this attention, but this is simply to fall under the misapprehension that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Yes, there can be bad publicity. There's such a thing as bad publicity when it comes to climate deniers, right? When people who are climate change deniers are happy to find any fault with the messenger, and there's so much wrong with this messenger. And it's not the facts she adduced were incorrect, right? It's that she's not qualified to be lecturing and scolding people on that any more than any chosen at random. And as such, she is easily dismissed as ignorant, unqualified, brainwashed, a pawn, and a tool of the environmental movement, and so forth, right? And there's any number of university students who could have delivered the same speech, slightly less caustically, but and with more sincere passion, who could not have been dismissed in the same way. Now, would it have generated the same amount of attention? No, probably not. I think part of it is because there was something kind of taboo here. We had a school child scolding very, very powerful people, and people. I mean, that's just a great story, and that's why she has been catapulted to the forefront. Now, I hope that she will grow up, get an education in the field, have impeccable qualifications, so that she cannot be impugned in this way. But it's not the issue is not that she doesn't have the right motives and is insincere in her objectives and in her beliefs. But I just don't think that she's the right spokesperson. And the fact that a lot of people are talking about it, that does not mean that it's the right kind of talk. Right? People in their millions are dismissing her and use it to discourage the entire environmental movement.
We understand your point, and I've taken your point, and I think it's a perfectly valid one. But we seem to have been joined by Peter. So let's hear what Peter has to say.
Hi guys, thank you for adding me. First of all, I really respect you. I spoke to you once before, and I think.
Yeah, I remember. Hello again.
Hello again. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you in almost everything else, but I think in this case, I think I have to really vehemently disagree. I think the problem is I posted on the chat about Brexit as a analogy. The vast majority of experts in Brexit agree, probably similarly to the climate change, that Brexit is a bad thing, but it doesn't win people over all the time. We all know that people who are intelligent know that, leaving the European Union is a bad thing, etc., etc. But actually winning people over the argument sometimes requires a little bit extra. It's not, I think it's been mentioned already that, Greta Thunberg isn't an addition, it's not instead of, but it's just another thing to add on top. It just persuades more people and just brings more people into the argument. And I think over time, perhaps, that controversy, the argument wins out over time. You sort of have it does, as you say, bring the people for and against very vehemently, but the truth will win out in the end. And bring it to the center of attention is really what's important about her message.
Well, I think the stakes are a little high here to just sort of, and I know you're not being, you're not just temporizing and saying, well, we'll just have to wait and see or something like that. The stakes are extremely high here. We don't want to just sort of sit on our hands and say, well, the truth will win out in the end, because the truth is going to hit us like a jet plane right in the face, right? It's going to hit us at 400 miles an hour. We are running headlong into a catastrophe on a scale that we've never seen before, unless we can turn this ship around. So I am not someone who is content to say, well, let's just let everybody out there say whatever they want, and whoever rises to the top as a public figure and influencer here, it's all to the good. No, it isn't always to the good, right? Sometimes you can have people that can absolutely galvanize your opponents and make them stronger. That's a problem. And that's something I worry about mightily, right? I don't like bad counter-apologists, right? People who offer bad criticisms of religion, they piss me off. And they piss me off because they make our enemies stronger, and they discredit us. They make us look weak. They make us look stupid. They make us look irrational. And that is what I fear we saw on display on that occasion. It doesn't matter how correct her facts were. The presentation was all wrong. This was the wrong person. That's what I'm arguing. Not that the cause.
But I think this is where the argument comes in. It's been made already. Is bad apologetics is bad because the facts are wrong. You don't go to an apologist and say, no, you're right. You've got a really good argument, but you're just not very charismatic.
No, I mean bad counter apologetics, right? I don't like my fellow atheists put forward bad when an atheist puts forward really bad arguments against a religion, right? What happens there is all the religious folks say, all those atheists out there who come up their arguments are like that, right?
But you've already agreed that the arguments, the counter apologetics, so in this case, are right. They're not bad counter apologetics. You've already agreed that the content of speech seems to be accurate.
But you're missing the analogy there.
No, hold on.
You're missing the analogy. I'm not saying that her facts are wrong, and then that she's presenting bad counter apologetics. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you don't want bad counter apologetics on your team. You don't want any apologetics on your team that are bad. There's an interesting psychological fact. I think Hogtie will be familiar with this. A lot of people in the audience might be familiar with this. That if you have two arguments, a really good argument and a weak argument, okay, and you present the strong argument but not the weak argument, you will persuade more people than if you present the strong argument and the weak argument, because people will focus on the weak argument, and it is like a halo effect. It diminishes the efficacy and influence and persuasiveness of the strong argument, right? And it's the same thing with figures in activists. You don't want the wrong people at the forefront of a movement. They discredit the movement, and that I fear is a lot of what has happened with climate change denial. It's easy to deny if you have the wrong people leading the charge.
I think the thing you're doing there is, on one hand, you're saying, in one comparison, you're saying it's the argument that's bad, and then on the other side, you're saying it's the personality, it's the person delivering it that's bad.
There are two ways to be bad. There are two ways to be the wrong person. You can be the wrong person because you're just absolutely. Let me give you an example. I know a person who's, I'm not going to name names, but I know someone who is enormously charismatic, but has really bad arguments against religion. Okay, that is one way to be a bad counter apologist. I don't like that person on my team. I know another person who's quite the opposite, right? Has really, really good arguments, but is so unspeakably rude, so ugly and hostile in every interaction that I don't like to have this person on my team either, right? You have one that's got the wrong arguments, but the right kind of personality. And then you got the other person that's got the wrong kind of personality and presentation, but better arguments, in fact, quite sober arguments. Both of them present a problem, right? We don't want to discredit ourselves. Credibility is everything in this when you're dealing with conspiracy theorists, right? The last thing you want to do is appear unqualified, appear fake, appear insincere, right? And the last thing that the mainstream media ought to be doing is catapulting the wrong person and making them the figurehead of a movement and an entire generation. That is what I worry about this. This is what exercises me about the Greta Thunberg instance.
I suppose my final question, I'll put this to you and then I'll let someone else speak. My final question would be, probably for 30 odd years, we've had climate change being pushed by experts and pushed by people who, you talk about PhD students, people who actually have some sort of education in the subject, and these people have been pushing it for 30 years. If it's not someone like Greta Thunberg, what kind of person do you see who's going to push the argument into the public domain? I mean, to the point that she has. I mean, the media is a fickle thing, and we can talk about the kind of the problems of the media and who they promote and etc. But she's managed to do it. I mean, who else? What kind of character would you expect to see if not her?
If she had gone on that stage and opened fire or bathed herself in blood or done something sort of otherwise ugly and egregious, she would have garnered the same kind of attention, right? And those would have been uglier ways of presenting this, right? But the point is that would have made her a media darling too, right? But I mean, look at a movement like PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. That movement was gaining a lot of ground, getting a lot of attraction, gaining a lot of political traction and interest and sympathy for a long, long time. And then things started to turn. At first, it was because they were media darlings. They were going around and throwing, blood or paint and stuff like that, red blood on people who were wearing fur and stuff like that. And then eventually this started to turn around. People started to think of them as sort of dangerous radicals. We have to be careful about how these movements can go. Things can turn. It is not enough to say any argument will do and any spokesperson will suffice. That I think is just a little too wide-eyed and optimistic.
Well, take an example of somebody like Al Gore. Al Gore puts out the inconvenient truth. He starts up about a decade ago this conversation, and releases the movie, gets this big audience, starts garnering a bunch of support there, and then what happens is well, hold on a second. I mean, look at this. He's got ties to all these new clean energy companies. That this isn't about him saving the planet. This is about him from other types of energy, and then all of a sudden his motivations come into question, and now you've given an avenue to people to start dismissing what he's saying. And whatnot.
I think we're going a little bit off topic, are we? I don't know. People are happy to carry on.
I'm happy to continue with the subject, but I do have to go. We were supposed to go 90 minutes, and it's almost 90 minutes, so I do have to go. I've got an early appointment tomorrow, but I'm happy to continue talking on this. I don't know that I want to just change gears now, but I'm a little worried that I'm rehearsing the same argument over and over again, and I don't want to bore people. So I'll leave it to others to decide where we should go.
Carry on.
I think I'll just, if we're wrapping up, I think my final point, I think I'm repeating myself, but I think obviously you might be slightly confusing the content with the messenger. And you mentioned G-Man, and you said, G-Man's a very bad messenger for Christianity, or kind of representative. And it's not because of his personality, really. It's because
it's because of his personality.
You think? I think it's more content.
I mean, there are tons of people who think just like G-Man. The problem with G-Man is just his personality.
All right, fair enough.
No, hold on. No. That's the confounding right there.
I have to agree with Ossie on this one.
Fair enough.
G-Man is a terrible proponent for Christianity. Anyway, we've got someone else in the chat room, so let's go with him. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just momentarily just dropped in, and I missed the last statement, so I don't know where to start off on. But yeah, I'm a Christian, so as far as the whole climate change subject, I see it as like a good example of how, it's just another a secular religious movement to believe in saving the world through, I guess, the powers of science, or the predictive power of science. But what I see is the inability to actually call out false prophets in the scientific world. I think many atheists have no problem calling out false prophets in the religious world, but when the scientific world, or I guess the secular world, create their own predictions and come out wrong, no one calls them false scientists from their standards of, what you consider credible or I guess someone who you should not believe, and so on. So I think that's something that I notice in this debate about climate change. It's their inability to not call out their own false prophets.
May I ask you, out of politeness, how would you like to be addressed? What's your name, or what name?
I'm Justin. You can call me Justin. Justin Wilson.
Okay. So are you a believer that climate change is not happening, or what? What exactly is your position?
My position is that if there is climate change, it's happening at a minimal state because of humans, but it's actually a vacuous statement to even make, considering that climate has always been changing throughout history.
Okay, so when you say vacuous, do you mean that it's not going to have any impact on future generations?
Yeah. Or if it does, you wouldn't be able to tell whether we had actually caused that or not.
Okay. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, this is
Well,
go ahead.
If your first criticism is about the term climate change, of course, the climate's always been changing. Of course, the weather changes, lots of things change. Great. If you wish, we have to, on every occasion, say anthropogenic climate change. So we make it clear that we're talking about that component, which is generated by human activity. And I want to ask you a question. So of the evidence that you've seen that indicates that it's able to tease apart those aspects, those contributing factors to climate change that are part of the sort of natural movement of the world versus that portion that's human caused. What are your thoughts on that research?
Well, I mean, I feel like all the research is still very, it's very specific in many areas, to the point where you can't really tell if it's actually making a global effect at all. So for them to actually, for example, check the growing temperature of our city, right? Now the city, of course, would probably grow in temperature, considering we are changing the infrastructure, the heat is bouncing off from the concrete in different cars and so on. So sure, it's going to be hotter each year in a city that's growing, but also not considering the balance effect of heat, and then, I guess, cold winds or cold fronts, creating another, I guess, balancing effect around the world. We're not considering all the factors that are just causing it to come back to, I guess, equilibrium, where things are just back to normal.
I'm going to take that answer to mean that you're actually completely unfamiliar with the rationale. Those scientists, those climate scientists who say that you can actually tease apart that there's some of the climate change happens as part of the normal course of how the Earth works, and some of the climate change is due to anthropogenic factors. There's a methodology that helps them come to that conclusion. And I'm going to take your answer to clearly indicate that you're just unfamiliar with that research. You just haven't looked into it. You're incurious. You're not interested to know how they come about that. Your specific example about cities warming up as they expand, well, you know what? All you have to do is compare. Chicago has been a pretty big city for a pretty long time, right? And then take some other smaller city that's only recently been growing. Why is the smaller city warmer than Chicago was back when Chicago was a big city in 1930? Why? All right. So I mean, your specific example is just a complete stab in the dark. Well, here's one possible thing. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I kind of feel like you're one of those people I was discussing earlier, that it really doesn't matter what, how the scientists come to these conclusions, what message is being communicated, because you just don't want to believe it, right? You just don't want to believe it. So it doesn't matter. Why? What's the point of explaining to you how they come to know these differences? Let me ask you one quick one about, okay, so what about CO2? What's the cause of CO2 increasing so much? Great. Listen,
I mean, I guess there's more. I would imagine there's more people breathing, us using the oils and the gas, the coal that has been unearthed from ages, and us constantly using it. I would say that's the cause of it.
So you list only one factor. I mean, that's one set of things, and that's they're all anthropogenic. These are all human-caused things. The fact that there are more people, which I wouldn't say that the number of people is really that big of a difference. The planet's been able to, we can wait. The planet's been able to accommodate a lot of, organisms breathing for a long time. That's not a big deal. But yeah, it's the fossil fuels is a really big thing. So is it then that you just not think that the increase in CO2 concentration is contributing to climate change? Is that?
No, I just think that there's an outlet for all that. So, I mean, if there's more carbon out there, then the trees are growing more, and they're just all they're doing is just taking that in.
I do have to ask you to explain that, because it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Well, I mean, I've heard some statistics that there are more trees today than there were 100 years ago. Is that true?
I don't think it is true.
Does inversely the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere increase the population of living species?
It's true that there is, in fact, more biomass locked up in trees now than there was a generation ago. But that does not mean that all that carbon has been, that we are fixing more carbon in that biomass than is just sort of free floating in our atmosphere and heating up our atmosphere. That doesn't follow, right? We're generating, we're putting out and releasing more carbon than is being fixed by biomass.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's measurable. I mean, this is part of what is being measured.
Can I just clarify with you, Ozzy? Are we emitting more carbon or more carbon dioxide?
Well, it's carbon dioxide, but I mean it's carbon being released. I mean, if you burn a log, you release all the carbon in the tree that's there, right? So there's a tree, for instance, that only has so much carbon in it. You don't want to release all that carbon at once. A tree, when it rots, it releases that carbon. One way to think of just organic rot is that it's a very, very slow burning. Okay, but the rate at which you release carbon and the rate at which you fix carbon matters. And if our forests are starting to recover, if there is in fact more biomass locked up in trees now than it was a generation ago, that's great. But it's not great if in fact we're just pumping out, because of the use of fossil fuel for everything from cars to industry to agriculture, then it's not a good thing. We are in fact releasing more carbon into the atmosphere than is being fixed out of the atmosphere by biomass.
So can I ask your guest? Can I ask your guest about that claim? Do you think Ozzy is right about that claim that we're emitting more than the trees are absorbing? That the amount is actually increasing on net?
No, I can't tell. Like I haven't actually checked it out myself, so I have to suspend judgment. I mean, I don't believe something.
That's good.
Because
you know what? That's good. I'm fine with your answer right there. Because
no. Let me interrupt.
Okay, I gotta go. I gotta go by. Like if you're gonna interrupt me I gotta go.
Yeah, yes, I am going to interrupt you. If you are not able to say whether that is correct or not, then you do not have a positive position, and you cannot prove your case. Okay?
Well, no, I still have valid questions.
Oh, you may have faith, you may have questions, but you have no evidence to support your view at all. Yes?
Well, Yeah. So like when I started off talking about
You,
like the
you
false,
just accepted that that was correct. Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
but like if I started off my statement with, okay, the false predictions that came out from what they claim to be evidence, then that should be enough evidence to doubt, against what they're saying.
I have no problem with doubt. What I have a problem with is assertions that are made without evidence. And what you seem to be making is an assertion without evidence. Yes?
Well, no, I think I made an assertion such as there are more trees growing today than there were
But
like
you've
100 years ago.
no
Was that not backed up? I'm sorry?
You have provided no evidence for that.
Well, my friend just backed me up here with that. I mean, did he provide evidence?
Who's your friend?
Well, the gentleman that was just talking after me, who was making a comment about, the Mahdiist.
Yeah, no, I didn't present any evidence. I'm repeating a claim that is the sort of claim that I hear coming out of the mouths of scientists all the time, and I trust the relevant experts. I don't double check all of the relevant experts because I don't have the relevant scientific background to evaluate their claims anyway. I mean, so when I need a lawyer, I trust the lawyer. Same thing with plumbers, and the same thing with scientists. I trust the relevant experts when they have relevant expertise. A difficulty here, though, is we live in a world where the imprimatur of science is diminishing, where people respect science less, are more mistrustful of science, and wherever science impinges on people's values, where they perceive it as being in conflict with their moral values, their religious values, their political values, or whatever it is, then they start to get suspicious about it, and they'll put the science on the back burner, right? And this is why when it comes to scientific findings that have political implications, you can't just fight the battle at the level of science. You've got to make sure that the people making the claims have the right credentials and are able to make the right arguments and sustain them, right? So, which is why I'm not going to the UN and giving talks on this subject, because I'm not qualified, not even remotely, okay? But if you have people who are manifestly unqualified, then everyone who has a reason to be suspicious because they think the science is somehow motivated by the wrong things, is not motivated by a disinterested pursuit of truth, but is in the grips of a political agenda, right, or a social agenda, or a moral agenda, right, then they're not going to listen to it, right, and they're going to be able to dismiss it. And if we were all sort of science worshippers, this would not happen, right? We would not have all of these conspiracy theories about evolution and climate change denial and all the rest of it. That is not how people operate. They operate at a much more emotional, visceral level, and they weigh scientific claims against their values wherever science has bearing on their values. It's why people who believe in who deny evolution, who believe in creationism and young Earth creationism, for instance, they're okay with physics, except where the physics implies that radiometric dating is a reliable method. Oh, well, then to hell with the physics. They believe in adaptation and evolution, so long as there are no major transitions from one species to another, just microevolution, right? Wherever the science is okay with their values and their beliefs, that's okay. They're okay with the science. Wherever it impinges on something that they value, right? And in this case, with climate change, it's things like their choice to drive a big polluting car or something like that, a Jeep or some I don't know, whatever a big polluting car is these days. I don't drive a big polluting, I drive a tiny thing. But the point is, wherever those values are impinged upon by the science, people become immediately suspicious of the science, which is why who is delivering the message is vitally important. And it can't be someone who can be dismissed as a school child who by virtue of being a school child cannot possibly have the relevant credentials.
Well, I think, hypocrisy and faulty logic is a universal trait for all humans. So, this idea, for example, that, scientists are in the subject are impervious, or they just cannot have some fault in logic, or it's impossible for them to be hypocritically claiming something. It's, I mean, that's just illogical. I mean, considering that we're all human here. And then on top of that, considering,
Can I just pause you there, if I may?
Okay.
Why is it illogical?
Why is it illogical?
If science provides a method of, let's say, prediction or whatever, why is science illogical? I just don't understand what point you're trying to make.
No, a lot of times we have a category error when discussing this subject.
Are you trying to say that science is wrong? And if so,
No.
can you give me an example of where it is wrong?
Okay, well, when I speak of this, when I talk in this subject, I have a clear distinction between science and scientists. Of course, science is a method, it's a tool. The tool could be perfect, the system can be right, but the people using it can actually misapply it or cut corners and not, use the system as it should be. So, of course,
I totally accept that there is that possibility. Can you give me one example where that has happened?
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know where all the scientists were when, Al Gore was telling us that all the ice caps will melt by 2016. They were just silent. Did they all believe this, or are they just, how were they right about that? Or were they wrong, or they were just too cowardice to even speak up and say, hey, this is not going to happen?
I'm not aware that scientists did say that.
Well, all this time, the public has not been aware. But
seriously, I'm being as fair as I can to you. Al Gore is not a scientist, and if he said that, then please post a link somewhere underneath the video which supports your evidence for that assertion. I'm not sure that he did say that, and if he did say that, I would not agree with it.
May I just?
He's not a scientist.
May I just interject?
He doesn't.
Well, he's a well-minded person who wants to convince people that climate change is happening, but the evidence that he uses may not be necessarily true. I don't know what you're referring to. So
I think that this is an interesting point, though.
I know what you're referring to. I can't contradict it. Yeah, do you understand? Yeah.
If I might just interject for a second, I think no one's claiming science is infallible. There's this sort of idea of the half-life of facts and things like that and whatnot. And the difference between science and a lot of other methods is science corrects itself. Science will say this is the best understanding we have of the world and the universe. And then when it finds something that's wrong, it says, no, we were wrong we were wrong last time. Now this is what we believe is the case. It's always trying to find itself wrong. And, say, for example, the Al Gore thing was true, where the ice caps were supposedly melting by 2012. If that was the case, then science has managed to find the better explanation, the better evidence. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just using an example, but science always corrects itself. Whereas something you say a Christian, other kind of forms of knowledge always saying this is the truth, this is the facts, and they can't be disputed, they can't be changed. And that's what's great about science. It's always able to correct itself.
No, there's a caveat there. I mean, there's a caveat. The idea is that science.
Just quickly, if I may, I think this is a much better analogy. You've got the Newtonian theory of gravity, and then you have the Einsteinian theory of gravity, and they are different. Isaac was very good at the small scale, Einstein good at the large scale. And for example, I mean, your sat nav would not work were it not for Einstein. So yes, science develops, it builds on itself, which I think the person I interrupted, and I apologize for doing that, is suggesting that religion really doesn't do that. I hope I've got that right, and I'll unmute myself.
Sorry, may I interject for a moment? Forgive me for interrupting. Dragnaut, who's producing the show behind the scenes, has just pointed out that we've run out of time. We need to start wrapping things up. And in any case, I have to go. I'm a little overdue here, but I want to thank everyone for hearing me out on this. DPR, was terrific seeing you again, and all the other panelists. Thank you very much. Cheers. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah.
I'll just say thank you, guys. You broke my my live streaming cherry, as it were. So thank you for having me, and it's really a pleasant experience to find something to disagree with Ozzy on. So thank you very much, and have a good night.
It's very difficult.
Yes, it is, and normally, yeah. Not tonight, though. Thank you very much.
It blows my mind every time I talk to him, and yeah, I agree with you. Very difficult to find anything that you can object to about what he says.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who was watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you follow the Magic Salmon Show. I will not be the host for the foreseeable future. I suspect it's going to be JD Kane or someone else, but it's been fun to have a chat with all of you, and please follow, support, and what else? Facebook. It's a Facebook channel, Twitter account, I think. So let me just have a look at some of these messages. Oh, thank you. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Beige Price. Not bad for first stream. I don't know what you mean by that. Yeah. Thanks, DPR. Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. We miss you, DPR. Oh, you're being too kind. But anyway, thank you very much, everyone. I don't actually know how to close the show because it's not being run by me. Squagnaut, I think, has probably fallen asleep, so I don't know how to end the show. I think I probably know how to excuse myself, but anyway,